Hello, everyone, and welcome back to week 4 of season 2 of the Inspire series. Today, I have with me again the expert panel of children's authors, Holly, Josh, Michelle, and Karen. Sarah, unfortunately, can't be with us for this one. But today, we're discussing and doing a deep dive into the world of young adult literature. YA literature has gained immense popularity in recent years, captivating readers of all ages. So I guess we're just going to do an exploration of what they are, their complex themes, what happens in those complex themes, social issues, because YA is, in week 3, we talked about the mid-grade reader, and how they, that is such a broad area for the 8 to 12-year-olds. YA is the next step up, even more complex than the mid-readers. So, we're going to delve into the world of young adult. Michelle, you've have you written young adult?
I have it. I have.
I thought you had. Yeah.
So I found it not as hard as I thought to write young adult. I thought I would suck because I thought, writing for kids, I can channel that kid part of myself and write something. I'm around kids all the time. You can beta reader it with the kids. You can see if they like it. Young adult is so different. And I actually did a lot of research. So this one is co-authored with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. And before we actually started writing it, we interviewed about 60, 70 young adults. And this was during COVID. So over Zoom and through email, because representation is so important when it comes to young adult. I think I didn't want to be a 40-something old woman writing young adult and doing a really bad job of it and not representing what young adults today wanted to read. There was also something very tricky about going back to that 16, 17, 18-year-old self who for me didn't have a really fun time. That wasn't necessarily a really happy part of my life. So it was really hard going and revisiting a lot of that stuff that happened in my own life, and then being able to transition that into a modern readership. So in the young adult series, we have 3 books. One is written from the perspective of Jude, who is a 16 turning 17-year-old boy. And then we've got the next one is Cece, who is a 20-year-old girl. And then we have Abel, who's the last one, who's written as a 17-year-old boy. So it was tricky, but I think for me, it was really important that we spoke to teenagers and asked them what were the sort of themes, what were the sort of things that they wanted to see in the books.
Yeah. Did you find that, just thinking of children of those ages and my own children, they're adults now, but looking back at those years, did you deal a lot with or come across that kids wanted to know more about, the topics of, because it is going to the adult area, the themes of sexuality and drugs. Drugs are out there everywhere these days, have been for a while. Gender identity, once again,
drugs. Drugs wasn't a big one. The biggest one that they wanted to actually read about or shine a light on was actually eating disorders. So talking about body image, that was huge for both boys and girls. Also mental health, Generational trauma was a big one. So dealing with a lot of stuff that had been passed down to them from their parents.
Yeah.
And then sexual identity was, you know, how do we support? And it was more so about supporting people within a friend group who were struggling with their sexual identity and how to support them through that. So it was really interesting talking to them. They're amazing. Like anyone who has any doubts that this next generation of kids coming through have not got it all sorted, like they do. They're all over it. Like there's so much. They are self-aware.
Yes.
They speak about their emotions. They aren't scared to talk about stuff because, you know, I feel like as you know, I don't want to speak for all of Gen X because I never would dare to do that. But I almost feel a little bit like I'm going like this to my parents and I'm kind of sheltering my kids and I'm stuck in the middle. But these kids, like, I think they really are coming through and having an opportunity in a world that allows them at least to speak on topics that perhaps we weren't as educated about at their age. Yeah.
And do you find, Josh, that books reflect that, what Michelle's just talking about, do they reflect all those issues?
Definitely. I mean,
and giving kids the ability to have that voice.
Well, the one in question is, for me, will be Invisible Boys. Hands up who's read this book. Have you heard of this book?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
I haven't read it.
Okay. By Holden Shepherd. He's a WA writer. Now, this one won the Hunger
I know Holden
Award.
Shepherd, yeah, but I haven't read that.
So this was his debut novel. It also won the Premier's Prize a couple of years ago as well. So basically, it's a YA, and we'll talk about pricing of YA books in a minute, because that's another thing which I didn't realize, because it's only like a whole book about lots of pages, only $20, as opposed to if it was the same thing was an adult book, would be 35 or 25 or something like that. Anyway, so this tells a story of 3 boys growing up gay in Geraldton, and they're the ages of 16 and 17 in high school. And he doesn't pull any punches. It's no whole. There's sex, there's drugs, all that sort of stuff in there. Honestly, there's swearing. So the kids who are going through the same sort of experiences are reading this book going, I feel seen. I feel I am normal. This is okay.
Yeah.
It's been supported, and the realness of it. And it's sort of, and that's where I think it's pretty groundbreaking what Holden's done in this book, is because he's pushed it out onto a limb as a YA book. You know what I mean? You know, normally you could say, only for adults, but no, it's YA. This is what kids are doing. This is what they're thinking. This is what they're experiencing. This is what their lives are like. And now they have a book that actually reflects that. And I think that's important. And that's the impressive thing that Holden's done. And, you know, even if it makes just one kid go, I feel seen, therefore I don't feel so ostracized, I don't feel so left out, I can feel connected. And mental health wise, they actually can get, okay, I've been feeling isolated, yada, yada, I'll get help. So those sort of things, that's where I think books like that are really important. And I think there's more of them coming through the ranks that are challenging the social norms, challenging what YA should be, and whether it should be safe. Can it be in a school library without people going, oh, it should be banned? Oh,
that's another discussion, a whole discussion for another day.
Michelle's got that experience, but you know what I mean? It is really good that we are having these books out there challenging that.
Yeah. Holly, is it like that in Canada? Do you have very many of those kind of books that Josh is talking about?
You know, I believe that we do. Like, I know that there's definitely those same topics are very, like, all the ones that Michelle mentioned as well are very, like, especially mental health. I hear so much about them, and in like a lot of conversation about it. I can't give you an example of the books that are addressing that, but I know that's definitely, I really see people speaking up. Definitely, like I agree totally about how the kids are very much for saying what they need. And I think they feel safe that they can speak up about it.
Yeah, yeah. And and like Josh said, if it's just one person who picks up those, that kind of book, and they feel seen, they feel heard and accepted, and it's just so worth it, isn't it? Karen, what's your experience with YA books?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of adults read YA,
Hmm.
me included. So when you're looking at the age, it blurs.
Mm.
And I think it's not just the topics, it's the fact that they deal with the hard stuff, and maybe the stuff that's not spoken about, but it can be written about. And it's a place for someone to go to read about it. And they are really impactful YAs, and they are gripping, and they are as well written as any adult book. And in a way, I think they don't pull away from, they say what needs to be said. And it's not just for a child to see, or a teen to see themselves in it, but it may be, often they'll deal with like first kiss or domestic violence or crushes or whatever. And it's a place to see, well, maybe how a character dealt with it, or what did that character do to get help, or how they came through it and survived. And also it's a way, even just to, if you're older and you read it, to feel connected to that generation and understand the generation. Some YA that I've read that I think, have you heard Trent Dalton?
Yeah.
Boy Swallows Universe. I looked at that and I went, oh, that's too thick for me. I live in picture book land, but I couldn't put it down. And it's based, I think, on him growing up. It's based around Brisbane.
Yeah, I actually really resonated with that book because we're the same vintage and we grew up very close to each other. So yeah, I love that book.
And even though it's written more back in time, it's gripping because teenagers still deal with a lot of that stuff that is in that book, and it's why it is such a good seller. And then even just recently, I couldn't help myself because I wanted to go back to being a teenager. As soon as I saw the title, I just saw a book and I went, it was The Summer I Turned Pretty.
It's a Netflix series now.
Oh, is it? Well, I just saw that title and I went, I've got to read that.
What's it called, Karen?
The Summer I Turned Pretty.
Oh, okay.
And I just went and I couldn't put it down. I
remember The Summer I Turned Pretty.
Oh, Josh, you were born pretty.
It was 1987.
You were born pretty. But that's really good point though, because I think as an author writing YA, you almost need to write it with the film adaptation in mind. So all of those books that you've mentioned, except for Josh's book, are in the process of film adaptation.
This is actually going to be a TV
Oh, good.
series.
Well, there you go. There you go.
On what's the Australian one? Stan.
Oh, it's going to be a Stan one. Awesome. So exactly. So YA is this genre that is write the book and get ready for the series. So even with the Duchesses, that's going to be turned into a series as well. So yeah, definitely. I think we are, as authors, I think we're finding a way that we can almost capture the generation in reverse, like watch the series, then read the book, or read the book before you watch the series. But it's I'm hoping that is a way that we can keep kids reading.
Yeah. And as writers, I think, we're responsible for tackling the hard stuff because that's what they want. And, it is what gives them that voice, you know, to be
And
seen. to be
I
heard.
just have to mention him because he's so iconic. And Holly, he's Australian, I'm sorry. But, John Marsden.
Oh, yeah.
in the
John
war.
Marsden, yeah, yeah, yeah,
He's incredible. And his stories, like you're saying, some of them are like topical, but his work never dates.
yeah. My son grew up on John Marsden books when he was going through high school. He
Yeah.
loved them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep, just incredible. And I think Trent Dalton, his book will never date. And there was another book, and it struck a chord with me, and I've never forgotten it. And it's not that I can go back and tell the storyline, but the title, I just know the emotion in the book has carried. Came back to show you I could fly. You might have heard of that one, Holly. I think it's American.
Mhm. Yeah, I have.
Yeah, I can't remember who wrote it, but it's someone huge. But that was really like, oh my God, they can actually write and speak about that. Because a lot of the time, adults won't talk about things with teens that need to be talked about, or they're uncomfortable even to talk about it with each other. So they'll see it in a book or
Yeah.
feel it in a book and live it in a book. And even like The Summer I Turned Pretty, it was like, well, you know, when you meet a boy and, you know, it's that first time you really connect with the boy and, you know, you think about yourself and how that time was for you. So books are doorways into your life and what you're feeling, whether you're old or young or teen, even whatever. But I love YA for that because it takes you there and you feel it, and you breathe it, and you can also develop empathy because now they've got gaming and, you know, like what Michelle was saying, the body issues and things. I mean, I guess we all had body issues, but now with social media, and you've got to have that Insta, and then you've got the Insta. Oh, I read another one that was really good, and I loved it. It was called The Ivies.
Yeah.
And it's about the 8 universities that are the top ones to get in America. And I couldn't put it down. And I thought, I don't know anything about these Ivy houses and what goes on. So I learned about it through the book. And even though I'm not a YA reader, I was like, wow, I hope they make this into a film. Michelle, there you go. The Ivies, it was, and it had everything in it. It had the social media, it had the bullying, it had the bitching girls. Oh, it had a murder. It had the cheating and the scheming and the
Sounds terrible. Oh, God.
But do you think we get so sucked into the YA books because we all love reading them, even though we may not write them, is because they're written with so much immediacy in the moment.
Yes.
And that's what, you know, the teens live. They live in the moment. And they're so full of the emotives, like, you know, that it just draws you in. Yeah.
It's that. It just gets you here.
But is it also the universality where we're all teenagers, and no matter what era you were living in as a teenager, all the feelings are the same. The feelings of acceptance, rejection, all that sort of stuff. They just play out differently. Because when Holden gave his interviews for Invisible Boys, he kept saying that he kept getting emails from all these older blokes, you know, my age, and going, that was me when I was young, or that's what I wanted to happen when I was young. So everyone could relate to it, no matter how old they were. And I think that's the sort of, you know, people talk about, you know, as you're saying, adults read YA novels. It's because we all were that teenager once. We all wanted that. We all wanted that thing to happen. I think that's the great sort of connector, the universality of it.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of firsts in that age group. And
yeah, you're right. You're right, Karen. Yeah.
First, like even if it's driving a car or first camping trip.
awkward sex, awkward
Yeah,
everything.
anything. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
mm.
But yeah, it's just like what you said, connecting to that.
Mm.
And then they do make great films when they're well written.
Have you noticed there's a big? I can go onto Netflix, and all the things, you know, new releases or coming up, and they're all these fantasy things all based around teenagers.
Mm.
And I can only assume that they started out as books, as what Michelle was saying. It was a book series or a book, and someone's, let's make some money out of this. Let's turn this into a TV show or movie or something like that. And it's like
Yeah.
it ends up getting a little bit repetitious. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
It just
I
made
think-
me think of one. Sorry, I can't help myself. The Hunger Games.
Mm. There's so many spin-offs or variations of that in a way.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
I think it's the generation because and I think COVID has had a lot to do with that as well. If you have a look at that age group, they don't go to the movies like we used to go to the movies. They stay at home and they watch their phone. They have 24-hour content. So that's a lot of content that providers have to have available and accessible to that age group. So I think they're discovering, especially with production companies like Reese Witherspoon's book club and how she has books that she turns into movies, that they're seeing that the YA genre has actually got an amazing resource for those films because they are telling stories that kids want to hear. And I think they almost test them. I think they test it out and see how the book goes, and if the book goes well, then they make that content. But it's just a generation of 24-hour accessible content.
That's a great point, because even they get the Uber Eats in and stuff, so they can sit and just binge. And it
Well,
is
they can
like, how
afford
much can the
Uber
brain
Eats.
take? Like,
Holly, you're shaking your head there going, yes, totally agreeing with that.
Totally. Yeah. Like, I mean, the whole thing, you know, yeah, like there's just so much content that's needed, all of that. And the of course the Uber Eats as well, you know, so.
They don't have to wait for anything. Like I can remember having to wait, you watched one movie a week on Sunday for Sunday Disney. And that was, that was the one time you're allowed to have the TV to yourself, because otherwise the grown-ups would choose what to watch. So it's totally, 5:30 on Sunday. And then you might be able, I was never allowed to watch shows before I went to school, but you come home in the afternoon and it was Monkey Magic and the Inca cartoon and all of that stuff. Yeah, the goodies. Yeah. And
Doctor Who.
Young adult was always kind of just mushed in with that. There wasn't, talking about young adult content, visual content to written content, it's very different. And the genre young adult, because I do need to apologize, because I know I had previously said that young adult was a new thing. And doing my research, I figured out it actually isn't a new thing. It's just every generation have had their own version of young adult. So like Little Women is a young adult novel for that generation, because you're talking about 4 girls who are all teenage girls and going through their own things. And even Anne of Green Gables, like the next step up, the Anne of Avonlea, when everyone's getting married. And, that each generation has had their own young adult, but it is only just now that we're calling it young adult. We've never called it young adult before.
Yeah.
I love Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
A TV show. I never read the book.
Oh, didn't you? I've got the whole series.
So is that classed as middle grade or young adult?
Well, the very first book in the series would definitely be middle grade while she's at school. But then Anne of Avonlea, she's 16. So this would be class YA. And then Anne of the Island, she is she's 18 and all her friends are getting married. So this would still be YA. And then the next
And
one,
she
when
never
she's
got together with Gilbert, did she?
she did, and they had kids. Nobody
Oh, serious?
like
I remember I only watched it to the end of the second
no,
series or
you
the
got to
mini
watch the
series,
next
and
one. You got to watch the next one, and then the next one after that, they
Oh.
get married, and then Gilbert can't go off to war because he was sick. Oh gosh, we could do a whole Anne of Green Gables one.
Did you know, as a bit of an aside, okay, Gilbert, the guy who played Gilbert in the TV series, the original TV series, he was gay.
Mm. And he passed
And
away
he
really
didn't.
young. It was
Yeah,
so
he was
sad.
only in his late 40s or something, and he didn't come
Yeah.
out until it was after that, and because he didn't want to disappoint his fans. Really
Yeah.
sad. But anyway, that's an aside.
And Megan Forward is now a kick-ass queen on her series that I love it that she's coming back. Anyway, we're totally
Oh,
getting
really?
off way. Yeah, but this is
We
but
are.
that's what YA does. That's it. YA is this like it's almost like this catalyst. So it just initiates all discussions on all different things. And I go to a YA book club, like with my daughter-in-law, and I feel so out of place when I go there. But I just sit there and I listen to these intelligent, articulate women having full-on proper discussions about all of these YA books, and I just absorb it. I just love it. I just go, oh my gosh, you girls are amazing. Like I just want to be your friend. And it's just I love it. And I think YA does that amazing things, amazing initiating conversation stuff. And I think as a Gen X, I the reason I love it so much and I read it is because I think I kind of missed out on that. I can't think of very many what I would call young adult books that defined my generation. The only one I can think of is really Looking for Alibrandi, but apart from that, I do not have.
I agree with you, Michelle. I'm the same vintage, so yeah.
There wasn't
What about
there
Alice?
wasn't books. Yeah.
Looking
Holly, do you agree with that? Do you have many books that come to mind, like like Michelle was just saying?
I don't, and I just can't think of from my ones that I was reading, like the Hunger Games, that it is actually one of the books that is in the curriculum in the province that I'm living in. I can't remember which grade it is. But I remember one of my kids was really struggling to get going on reading, and at the whole series of the Pirates of the Caribbean, I found that it like I was researching if it was in this area, and that's where I found it. And that was fabulous, because I think from what I can gather, I think the movie may have come out first and then the books later. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I like how they go back and forth.
I think it's a Disney thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that was, and it's such an example of how much the adults loved the stories too. Like everyone I found when those were being read in my house, the adults were just as anxious to find out what happened at the end of the story as the kids were, and there were so many of them. So that was a good hook to get them in. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look and I'll let you know what where the Hunger Games falls.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so one last question, which I actually find an interesting one, and I often get different answers. Fantasy is huge in the YA genre. It's probably the #1 spot.
Yeah.
But there's also, your sci-fi, which is not too far behind, but it's not as popular. And I just kind of wonder why, is it because it comes across as a totally different genre within YA? Is it written differently? I'm just curious, like what is the difference between what makes fantasy stand out as opposed to the sci-fi? I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just being a curious cat.
I think in typical YA fashion, they tend to smudge. And I think Stranger Things has done a lot for sci-fi for this generation. There's a lot of amazing vintage sci-fi authors who have written amazing books, but I think the other thing, like if you look at something like Outlander, which is adult, but teens love it. I think the sci-fi fantasy crossover is hard in YA because YA is traditionally a gender blending kind of mushing of whatever you want it to be. So the one that I'm writing at the moment is a historical fantasy sci-fi because it has elements of all of those in it, and you can do that in YA and not have your publisher look at you and go, really is that a thing, is that a thing what you're doing? But they go, oh, it's YA, of course, that's fine, do whatever you want. And then you can smudge the historical fiction and a murder mystery. Like you can have the romance and you can have it blend with crime. Like it's just amazing that because it's this ever-changing dynamic sort of genre, I think you don't have to do that. This is sci-fi, this is fantasy, this is mystery. I think you can smudge a lot of the elements in it, and there's a lot of really great books that have come out really recently that do that. I can't remember the titles of it, but the ones that I've read was it was the legend of the moon something. I can't remember what it is, but it was a Chinese legend about this woman who lives on the moon, and how she got up there, and she has a daughter, and so this was kind of like a mystery cultural background sort of sci-fi fantasy thing, and it was amazing. And then there was another one about a house that was haunted, but it wasn't haunted because it turned out it was possessed, and then it had all of this other element. So I think that's one of the reasons that I love YA so much.
Absolutely.
Is it just quickly, is it because YA, the fantasy is more escapism, and with the reality of what teenagers have to face, escapism is actually a really nice option to have, whereas sci-fi is still an element of realism into it, if futuristic or whatever, but fantasy is just I can just throw myself away from all the madness of the world. Maybe that's one of the things why fantasy is more popular for YA. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Fantasy has to be very well crafted. Actually, any YA, the writing craft is really spot on. It has to be. And for it to be made into a movie, it has to be captured first by the craft. It's not just the topics that they're covered, it's how it's woven and how it's written. That is exciting.
Yeah, it certainly is a dynamic genre in every sense of those words. So, Holly, any thoughts of becoming a YA author?
I'm not sure if I'm going to be tackling this area. I'm starting at the picture books.
Yeah.
And I have my idea for my series, but I haven't decided exactly. I need to get a little bit more substance out there for it before I make that decision, but I'm excited.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a bonus. Josh, how about you? YA author in the future? No.
I'll stick to my normal nonfiction, unless I do nonfiction for YA. I don't know. I mean, I can explore so many different topics, and all it is just how you just change your language, just slightly tweak it. But apart from that, I could be I'm not going to rule anything out.
Never say never, Josh. Never say
Never
never.
say never. Yeah.
Michelle, we know that you are a brilliant YA author and you will continue to be. Karen, any thoughts for you about moving from picture books into the YA arena?
Sure about it, but I know I'll always read it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I did until we were talking. And then I thought, oh, but I have read this and I have read that. And I thought, oh, it's only if it really, like that title, The Summer I Turned Pretty, I went, just got to read.
Titles are huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Spent a lot of time figuring out titles.
YA titles too.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah. It's just as important as a picture book. The title and then even the cover.
And covers. Oh my gosh, covers. Stop.
Covers.
The amount of
That's a whole
time
nother-
that you have to spend.
Another
And the
time.
covers, they are like works of art. And I know that the girls at the book club, they will buy like 2 versions of the same book just to get the covers, because they'll release like a special cover, and then you have to get the whole books in the series all with the same cover. And then if they change the cover, or if they dare change the size of one of the books in the series, it is like game on. Like, how can they do that to us? But yeah, it's a huge thing. And I know there's been a couple of books at book club that have been chosen because the cover was pretty, and that probably wasn't a great option because I didn't really like the stories that much. But yeah, covers again in YA are huge.
Well, that's something that
They are.
you've taught me tonight. Yeah, I knew they were important, but I just didn't know the scope of just how important. So anyway, I need to stop us there. Once again, we could talk forever about so many things, but time's up for tonight. So thank you, Holly. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Karen. And we will chat again next week for week 5, halfway through. So thanks, everyone. Chat to you then. Bye.